I'm often asked what percentage of the produce my wife and I eat comes from our garden. The people asking the question are usually trying to get a sense for how big of a garden they'd need to grow most or all of their own produce. The answer to that question depends a lot on the percentage of your diet that's plant-based. If you're vegan or vegetarian, a garden this size might produce half or more of your produce. But if the percentage of your diet that's plant-based is lower, it could produce most or all of your produce. Today I'll share how much growing space we have, how much of our own produce we grow in that space, and I'll introduce a new video series that will delve into these questions in more detail. My hope is that this series will give you a better idea of how much of your own produce you can grow in your garden. Let's start by providing some context. How big is our garden and how many people eat from it? Our front and backyards are quite small. We have a total of about 1,600 square feet available, but when you subtract out walking paths and where we have ornamentals planted, we only have about 700 square feet planted with crops in spring, summer, and fall. And in winter, we have just under 200 square feet planted under a hoop house, low tunnels, and cold frames. We have a family of 3, including our cat Oscar. My wife and I are vegetarians and eat most of our produce fresh from the garden. We do store a small amount for fall and winter, and preserve some as well. Our cat Oscar has a small catnip container garden, but otherwise isn't too interested in what we grow here. So how much of the produce that we eat is grown here in our garden? It varies quite a bit through the year. In terms of fresh produce, it ranges from all of our greens and carrots in winter to all of our veggies and most of our fruit in summer. We also usually store enough garlic to last us through the year, and we store winter squash and dried beans for the winter. But we don't have a large surplus to store at the end of the growing season, for the simple reason that as vegetarians, vegetables and fruit are such a large part of our diet that we manage to eat almost all of our produce fresh from the garden. To answer the question in terms of a percentage, I'd estimate that our 700 square feet of growing space provides about 50 to 60% of the fruit and vegetables that my wife and I eat. And because our diet is mostly plant-based, this also represents a big part of our diet as a whole. But if we ate meat and a lower percentage of our diet was plant-based, I'm confident that we could grow more than enough produce to sustain us through the year, and we'd have a large surplus to store at the end of the growing season. And if our diet was closer to the typical American diet, our garden would produce far more produce than we could possibly eat. To get a better handle on how much of our produce comes from the garden, I'm planning a 4-part video series, one video for each season, in which I'll track all of our harvests over the course of the week and compare them to everything we buy from the grocery store that week. At the end of this process, I hope to have a more accurate answer to the question of how much of our own produce do we grow ourselves. And I hope to help you figure out how much space you would need to grow enough produce for your family, using the methods I describe in my videos, including season extension if applicable. Please look for the first video in this series within the next few weeks. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to.